Hello, welcome to the December 2023 office hours. This time around, just going to do some updates on various things, no single topic. We're starting off with a picture from lovely St. Andrews, New Brunswick, where my family comes from. This presentation is brought to you today by the Eclipse JGit project. JGit for all of your Git needs. The EMO is shutting down from December 22nd until January 1st. We will not be monitoring our inboxes during that period of time. You may get lucky while we glance, but please don't count on us being active during that period of time. The help desk will be actively monitored by the IT team, albeit at a reduced capacity. If you do have problems, please, or things that you require assistance with that the webmaster team can help with, please open a help desk ticket. And of course, please plan accordingly. No releases between December 22nd and January 2nd, of course. Just a little comment about metadata. When we created the PMI, we envisioned it as a one-stop shop to find out information about a project. It was created at a time when a Git repository was a place for code and not much else. Even if you look back at some of the oldest projects that we have that have been around for the longest, they don't even have, in many cases, README files, because that's just not something we did back in the day when the PMI was something that was required. We had Bugzilla for issue tracking, various forms of Git repositories for keeping content, project websites to provide information, a download server that was entirely separate and different. Expectations have evolved, and more now, people have come to expect that the information that they require about a project is all available in the GitHub project or in the GitLab project. So we've been changing things. The reason why I bring this up is we do have some, as I said, older projects that still don't have an awful lot of the metadata. And as we look at them, we are working with those project teams to have them add all of this missing metadata. And the reason is that expectations have evolved. And as they've evolved, the EMO has been observing this evolution, and is working with the project teams, trying to be very helpful to make sure that the project teams are providing the information that the community is expecting. This includes, like I said, the README, license file, contributing file, all of these things. This will change in the future. We are going to be at some point collecting release data directly from GitLab and GitHub. Right now, today, we require that project teams tell us about their releases through the PMI. We're going, like I said, we're going to make it so that we just get this. This information is all captured already by these by GitHub and GitLab, so there's no reason why we have to duplicate it. And of course, simultaneous release participation captured in GitHub via the SimRel project is another thing that's likely going to be changing over the next short while. We do build your code, so just as a matter of basic community awareness and community participation, please make sure that your content can actually be built locally. Please, especially if there are special things that need to be done to make your build work, please document that in a README or contributing file and keep that close to your code. When somebody clones your repository, they should be able to with a relatively small amount of effort, build it locally as much as is possible. There are, of course, always reasons for this not to be true, but we like to minimize those cases. As part of reviewing your content, Maria Teresa, and sometimes I, do try to actually build your content. And when we have trouble, if we are having trouble, then that means that other people are having trouble, and you may be cutting off portions of your community and opportunities for contribution. Please also, in README files, describe where development actually happens. If it's not in the default branch on your GitHub or GitLab project, please indicate where. We tend to try to build the default branch. Generally, that's the main branch. If the development work is actually ongoing work and interesting stuff is actually going on in a different branch, please make sure that that is documented. Just a reminder, I guess, that our intellectual property due diligence process is multifaceted. I fall into this trap myself. We tend to think of IP due diligence as checking third-party components for license compatibility or identify license, I guess, and license compatibility. But there's actually more to it than that. We do have a requirement to check project code contributions over a certain size. That size is anything over 1,000 lines of code. If we defer to your judgment regarding what 1,000 lines of code is, that can change. You can make, with many programming languages, you can have a single line of code that is, or a single line that contains all of your code. Generally, I tend to think of that as net new lines of code. So a patch file of 1,000 lines is far less than 1,000 lines of code. Again, I defer to your judgment. If it's 1,001 and you don't submit it, nobody dies. So just again, keep that in mind, that we still do need to look at that. When entire new repositories are added to a project's group or an organization, generally that would fall into the category as something that requires intellectual property due diligence review. And we're actually working on some tools to help identify when that happens and try to automate as much of it as possible. But in the meantime, we do still require that you check in with the IP team. The IP team does have an inbox, emo-ip-team@eclipse.org is a great way to just quickly ask the IP team something. We also monitor the IP compliance, I believe it's called, I want to say group, on our Matrix server. In addition to all of this, part of our intellectual property regime is the agreements. I guess are the agreements? The agreements are an important part of our intellectual property due diligence. So that you are checking for contributors to have signed the ECA is an important part of this, but that you are working under a current committer agreement is also important. These make sure that we have the necessary rights to distribute the content you produce under the license that you're providing it under, and a number of other things. So when you do change employers, pardon me, please do make an effort to reach out to EMO Records and inform them that you've changed employers so that we can make sure that our records are updated accordingly. We have this notion of a member, committer, and contributor agreement. If you work for a member company that has signed one of these agreements, and most of our member companies have, then you would be automatically covered under that agreement. In certain cases, when you work for a member company that does not have this agreement, or you work for an organization that is not a member of the Eclipse Foundation or you are self-employed, we would need an individual committer agreement. So again, please, when you change employer, please just make sure that we have a chance to review our documentation status for you and react accordingly. We have implemented committer badges. This has been pretty popular. I'm delighted that so many people have found the committer badges to be interesting. These are awarded to all of our committers. We're in the process of adding, providing them to all brand new committers. Existing committers can request the badge. We're not going to impose them on anybody at this point. If you want one, please contact EMO Records. The email address is at the bottom of this slide, and I'll post it in the notes when I post this video. EMO Records at eclipse.org or eclipse-foundation.org, both will work. Just request the badge, and Sean will take care of you. Pardon me. The Dash license tool, I released version 1.1 late last week. It does a couple of little things. You probably, for the most part, won't notice it. It splits core from the shaded jar, so there's an actual separate proper jar that eventually we'll be able to publish to Maven Central. The shaded jar still exists for convenience. It won't be something that we will push to Maven Central, but it'll certainly be something we'll maintain as part of the distribution, again, for convenience. It handles rate limits on GitLab. Well, it handles it. Previously, after about 5 calls to GitLab, you would get locked out for a couple of seconds and the Dash license tool would die. We did that. I implemented it that way on purpose. I implemented it so that it would fail rather than wait. I wanted, because I knew people were incorporating it into their builds, and I didn't want the Dash license tool to, when you get a 409 or 429 response back from a web server or 504, you basically wait a little while and try again. I thought that would add unexpected, non-deterministic. That's not right. The right word of the word, correct use of the word. But anyway, non-deterministic wait times. So we decided not to do that. I've got some thoughts about how we can make that either configurable or certainly more robust, and we're going to investigate that for a future release soon. Yeah, and there were some improvements on how it parses yarn lock files and package lock files that may result in a couple of extra review requests that I think are necessary. So this is an adjustment that may impact you, but should impact the IP team a little bit more. The tool does support multiple languages. We do get occasionally people asking us, why does the CLI version or implementation work differently than the Maven thing? And the basic answer is that they use different mechanisms. The CLI only works on what you tell it. The Maven plugin uses the Maven, it works on what the Maven reactor tells it. Sometimes those things are different depending on how you engage with the tool. Anyway, the CLI is the way that we engage with NPM technology or yarn lock files. It knows how to deal with it knows how to deal with certain file formats, but it deals with other things. And one of the examples is, I used this example previously for Python content. You can take a Python requirements.txt file and just use command line tools to massage it into a form that the tool understands. At some point, we may make the Dash license tool understand how to parse a requirements.txt file. That's not planned at this point. And of course, contributions are welcome if you're interested in that sort of thing. We are, as I've mentioned previously, we are at some point going to switch over to a package URL format. We've decided that this is a much more useful and generally used format for specifying dependencies, where there's actually some work underway right now to define a package URL format for Eclipse plugins, which is interesting. If anyone's interested in that work, we can certainly point you in the right direction. And of course, there's been a request open to parse SBOMs. One of the things I would like to do is have the tool modify SBOMs, walk through an SBOM, identify the content, figure out the license, and then put that license content into a new SBOM. So that's something that we have in mind. I don't think I actually have an issue open for that particular variation of use, but that's something that we will I will certainly do in the new year. So future for the Dash license tool, I am going to move that repository from the Eclipse org on GitHub to the Eclipse dash org. Going to factor out the CLI from the core so that those components can be used separately. I actually integrate the Dash license tool into other tools. And I'm thinking that eventually other people are going to be doing that sort of thing too. So we're going to try and accommodate that as best we can. Again, just try to be a bit more resilient, figure out ways to be more resilient, but at the same time, not add unreasonable wait times to use of the tool. And overall, just start reducing our dependency on clearly defined. We're finding that clearly defined itself has some problems with resilience. We get a lot of 504s and from them because the service is not available, and that's disruptive. So not sure exactly how I want to handle that. If we can't contact clearly defined, do we just fail, or do we have an option to just fire everything at IP Lab and just be done with it? Remove, again, slowly reduce our dependency on clearly defined in that manner. But again, these are things that we'll think about in the new year. On the topic of IP Lab, our automation continues to improve as we identify new cases. We try to handle them and provide as much automation as possible to reduce the burden on both you as a committer and on our IP team. By clearing up, by dealing with things with automation, we clear them up to work on the hard problems. The fact of the matter is that hard problems remain hard to resolve. And the corner cases are, as I describe here, a pain in the backside. But they just require more effort. And, the IP team, for things that require sometimes weeks of work, the IP team uses tools like Fossology and whatnot. And again, this bogs them down. So again, hard problems remain hard. Automation, again, is getting a lot of hits. We tend to be, relatively consistent, depending on the influx, depending on the nature of the things being requested. Sometimes we get some massive hits with automation. The amount of work that we have to do on hard problems, again, relatively stable, much more stable than the amount. It seems that much more of what we get requested to do we're able to handle with automation. Finding the source is sometimes hard. There's no discrete bundles, for example, for Eclipse or for Apache Derby. Their source files somehow, for some reason, they are apparently given a pass and they're allowed to publish to Maven Central without source. So, and there's no real simple way to get their source. So we've tried a bunch of different things. Ultimately, with Derby, we just have to go and get the source, package it up into a jar file, and manually give it to the IP Lab. We do try a lot of different things. We look in Maven Central. We look in other Maven repositories. There's a handful of Maven repositories that we've decided that we trust. in a couple of different namespaces. So we look at OSGeo has a Maven repository that we use to look up GeoTools. Location Tech mostly cares about that. But we do look in NPM.js, we look in Yarn package, we look in Cargo for that's for Rust dependencies. Anyway, there's a handful of repositories that we flip through looking for content, and generally we're pretty good. But every once in a while we find an outlier, and then we have to think about how we find that. And we do our best. In cases where we can't find something, we require a source attachment. Now, if it's available, if the content is available in an archive file somewhere, and you have that information, you can provide that information in the comment, in the main description, pardon me, for an IP lab issue. If you have a source a link that's labeled source with a URL, the tool will ignore everything else and treat that as the source attachment for the issue. If you drag and drop, you can just, if you have a jar file that contains the sources, you can drag and drop that into the description area and then change the file name. So in this case, I've dragged derby.jar. You can replace the derby.jar with the word source, hit save, and the tool just knows what to do from there. It knows how to deal with the relative URL from the drag and drop of an attachment. Please keep making SBOMs. A number of projects have started doing this, and that's fantastic. We're trying. We've got a couple of different efforts underway to generate an SBOM for the Eclipse platform, or Eclipse IDEs, I guess, for a specific IDE configuration. How do we generate an SBOM? Ed Merckx is working on something there. We have some other friends that are working. We have, again, another couple of different prototypes. We're hopeful that we'll be able to do that relatively easily. I have stated in the past that SBOMs don't make sense for Eclipse plugins. That may not be an entirely accurate statement. SBOMs also, in addition to describing dependencies, they also describe things like the tool chain used to create something. That's certainly useful and interesting information. So at this point, that's just more heads up that we're still thinking about this, and we still may at some point try to think about how or what plugins, what SBOMs for plugins look like. The best practices right now really haven't evolved much more than when I last spoke to you, but the idea is make your content as easy as possible to generate an SBOM from. The metadata in Maven, for example, provides us a lot of information that's very useful to generate an SBOM. License information, where the SCM is located, who the identity of the copyright holders, all of that information in the metadata of a pom.xml or a package.json file, very, very helpful for generation of SBOMs. So we're asking as much as possible for projects to include SBOMs as part of their builds. If you have not done that already, if you could look into it, that would be fantastic. I have a link at the bottom of this screen, which again I will add to the notes, basically pointing you to our the repository we have, number of issues there that we're tracking, along with a lot of helpful information on how to generate SBOMs in at least 2 different technologies. And we still need to investigate technologies like Python and Cargo and all of that. Don't include SBOMs in your repositories. They're not really meaningful there. They are meaningful when they're provided alongside the distribution artifacts. So including that as part of the artifacts that you upload to Maven Central or to NPM.js, that's super helpful. And we're working on ways of identifying that content. We're hopeful that we can avoid making it so you have to tell us where the SBOMs are, and instead just knowing where they are and figuring it out for ourselves. So anyway, we're working on that, and again, more information. We'll tell you more as we learn more. Relatively easy to add an SBOM generation to your Maven build. Again, the instructions are on the SBOM in the SBOM repository that we have on GitLab, and I'll provide links. I've actually been asked a couple of times why we're so focused on Cyclone DX rather than SPDX, and the answer is that maybe about a year ago, when we were looking at this, we decided that the way that Cyclone DX used package URL at the time to identify components, we felt was more useful than the way that SPDX was doing it at the time. And then we just ran with it. So that was, at least in part, you might be arbitrary. We don't really have a problem with SPDX. We just saw this one thing in Cyclone DX and thought, well, that's interesting. And then we started experimenting with it, and it kind of got away from us. And Cyclone DX is where we've been putting our effort. We would be just as happy with SPDX SBOM generation if that's what you and your project team would prefer. Getting close to the end. Secure your tool chain. You've probably already noticed that you've probably already switched over to using 2FA on all of the Eclipse resources, GitHub and GitLab in particular. Right now, accounts.eclipse.org does not have a 2FA solution, but the team is working on it. In the meantime, make sure you're using good passwords. Rotate your passwords periodically. As best as possible, use the best possible security practices you can with your repositories. There's some options that I've got on the slide here that you can consider. If you have questions or would like some help, the security team exists, at least in part, to help you. So if you reach out to security@eclipse.org, you will contact them, and you can get their help with matters of security. One thing that we've noticed with we now have an enterprise on GitHub, and one of the features it has is it tells us when certain tokens exist in code, and we've actually found a couple. So I don't think anybody on the call, I don't think these affect you, but those that you might be listening, we may be contacting you about tokens that are in your repository that probably shouldn't be. All right. I'll also use this opportunity to remind you that, remind you that CVEs are a bit of a badge of honor for many people. If a project that has no reported vulnerabilities is odd, right? There's when somebody is looking at a solution, and I've had people have this ask me about this on the various channels that I monitor. Why are there no CVEs against a project? If there are CVEs against a project, then that is an indication to the community that somebody is actually using the project content in anger. So again, CVEs are something that you should regard as a good thing. Trying to hide the fact that a vulnerability has been detected in your content is very natural for us. We don't like to, we think that those are the kinds of things we don't want people to find out about. But hiding them just means that only the people who have discovered them know them for themselves know about them. So telling the world through CVE reporting that a vulnerability has been detected is actually responsible behavior for our community. And again, there are people in our community that regard vulnerabilities reported through the CVE system, made available to MITRE and to NIST and to OWASP and to Dependabot on GitHub. Making all this available to the world is a sign that the project is healthy. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Report as early as possible, keep secrets only as long as necessary, and if you're not sure what you should do, contact the security team. The security team alias only sends to a small group of people. It's not a mailing list in the same sense as everything else. It has a very targeted audience. So when you contact the security team, you're contacting about 5 people, I think, and they all work for the Eclipse Foundation. It's less than that, it's probably 3. And that's all I had for the formal session today. I hope something here was useful. Marcelo, good morning. Good afternoon.
Hello. Sorry, I joined quite late.
I'm glad you could join. It's nice to have you here. So that was me just droning on for about 30 minutes. Nobody tried to interrupt me, so I assume I didn't say anything either interesting or controversial. Is any comments or questions for today?
Yes. Hi, Wayne. Angelika here.
Hi, Angelika.
So, thank you. No, it was really interesting. So in Tractus X at the moment we have, because you just talked about vulnerabilities, and it comes up from time to time that we detect that in our Docker images we have vulnerabilities. And we were discussing how to handle with that, because we think our Docker images are for demo purposes only, so should not used